The river was a monstrous churning beast, its dark waters devouring the shoreline under a sky ripped open by lightning. Chief Duro stood defiantly at the precipice, his royal robes plastered to his skin, his face a grotesque mask of terror and fury illuminated by the storm's violent flashes. "What more do you want from me?" he screamed, his voice raw against the thunder's roar. Behind him, his people huddled, a terrified chorus to his solitary confrontation. The river responded not with a louder roar, but with an impossible, eerie calm at its center. From this calm, a figure ascended, woven from liquid light and the very essence of the current. It was the river spirit, her form both beautiful and terrifying, her eyes holding the deep, ancient memory of the flow. Her voice was a symphony of 1,000 streams, a sound that silenced the storm itself. "You promised me peace, Duro," she whispered, the words echoing in the very bones of the onlookers. "You promised me respect, a harmony between your people and my flow. You vowed to be my guardian." She paused, and the air grew cold. "And you broke your sacred vow." Chief Duro fell to his knees, the weight of his arrogance finally crushing him as the memory of his transgression washed over him. The spirit extended a hand, not in compassion but in divine judgment. "Now the river will claim what is owed, and the price will be everything you built upon my broken trust." The villagers watched in horror as the water behind the spirit gathered, forming a colossal, towering wave that blotted out the sky, a liquid mountain of retribution poised to erase their world. Years earlier, the sun was a cruel, unblinking eye in a bleached white sky. The earth was a fractured mosaic of despair, and the great river, the village's soul, was reduced to a scar of cracked, dusty mud. Chief Duro, then a young man whose humility was as deep as the drought, knelt on the parched riverbed, his hands raised not in power but in desperate supplication. "Please," he begged, his voice a dry rasp. "Our children cry for water, our land gasps for life. We will perish." It was then that the old fisherman, Teo, appeared as if from the heat haze itself. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, but his eyes held a quiet, profound light. "The river is not dead, Chief," Teo said, his voice soft yet carrying immense weight. "It sleeps, and it dreams of the respect it is owed." From a simple gourd he offered Duro a calabash of water, cool, clear, and impossibly abundant. "Drink, and listen with your heart, not your pride." As the life-giving liquid soothed Duro's throat, Teo spoke of the ancient covenant. "Promise the river you will be its steward. Vow to protect its banks, to never take more than you need, to honor its seasons and its silence. Swear this, and its heart will beat for you once more." Desperation and a flicker of true faith ignited in Duro's soul. He clasped Teo's weathered hands. "I swear it. I vow to protect this river as I would my own child. I will be its humble guardian, now and forever." That night, as Duro stood alone on the barren riverbed, repeating his vow to the stars, a single fat raindrop struck his forehead. Then another. And then the heavens opened, not with violence but with a gentle, life-giving rain that felt like the river's own grateful tears. The village erupted in a celebration of green and gold. Crops sprouted with impossible vigor, children's laughter replaced the sound of coughing, and the river flowed with a clean, strong current that sang a constant song of life. The people in their joy crowned Chief Duro their savior, their miracle worker. At first, Duro wore this praise with grace, often seen in quiet conversation with Teo, seeking the old man's wisdom. But the constant adoration was a potent poison. A seed of pride, nurtured by flattering aids, took root in his heart. He began to believe the miracle was a testament to his own inherent greatness, a reward for his leadership alone. He ordered the construction of a grand palace overlooking the river. "My people need a leader whose strength is reflected in his home," he declared. Teo watched this transformation with a heavy heart. He saw Duro command the clearing of the sacred reeds and ancient trees that armored the riverbank against erosion. "Chief," Teo would interject gently, "those roots are the river's fingers holding the earth. They are part of your promise." Duro would dismiss him with a wave. "The river is strong because I am strong, old man. Your superstitions are for a weaker time." One evening, admiring the rising silhouette of his palace, Duro muttered to his inner circle, "We have outgrown the whispers of a simple fisherman." He did not see Teo standing in the shadows, hearing the cruel words. Nor did he notice the river, in that exact moment, ripple against its banks with a sharp, unnatural slap, the first subtle clenching of a fist. While Duro's world grew in grandeur, Teo's world remained small, centered on the river's well-being. He was poor in material wealth, his hut a simple assembly of mud and thatch, but his spirit was a deep well of kindness. His daily ritual never varied. At first light, he would walk the riverbank, collecting any debris, speaking words of gratitude to the water, his gnarled fingers gently tracing the leaves of the remaining plants. He cast his net with a reverent precision, never taking more than his family could eat, and the rest of his catch was invariably shared with the village's elderly, the sick, and the orphans who saw him as a grandfather. The children were his constant companions, and he filled their minds not with fears but with a deep, abiding respect for the natural world. "The river provides," he would tell them, his voice a soft rhythm against the water's flow, "but it also watches. It remembers every kindness just as it remembers every wound." The villagers, though they loved Teo, often viewed him as a charming relic. "There goes Teo, talking to the water again," they'd chuckle, not unkindly. But Teo knew a truth they had forgotten: the river did listen. One serene evening, as he sat mending his net, the sound of the current seemed to change, to form a word. It was his name, spoken not on the air but from within the water itself. "Teo." He leaned forward, his heart skipping a beat. The water swirled, and for a breathtaking moment, the currents coalesced into a face, ageless, powerful, and filled with a profound, gathering sorrow. The voice that emerged from the river was a chilling blend of gentle caress and dire warning. "Teo," it whispered again, the sound vibrating through the very wood of his boat. "The one who promised has forgotten himself. His heart, once humble, is now a fortress of pride." Teo, trembling with a mixture of fear and purpose, leaned closer. "How can I help? Tell me." The water around him grew suddenly, unnaturally cold, and the face within it sharpened, its features becoming more severe. "Remind him of his vow. The trees that are my protectors are falling. The silence of the fish is their protest. The river's patience is not infinite. Remind him before the current of his arrogance carries you all over the edge." The water then darkened into a deep, menacing indigo, and the friendly, familiar river seemed to become a vast, hungry abyss staring back at him. Teo scrambled backward, his breath catching in his throat. The weight of the message was an immense burden on his old shoulders. He was merely a fisherman, and Duro was a chief drunk on power and praise. Yet the spirit had chosen asterisk him. The fate of the village now rested on his courage. Pushing himself to his feet, he turned and began to run, not away from the river, but toward the source of the problem, the chief's opulent palace, the spirit's plea echoing in his mind like a distant drumbeat of an approaching storm. Teo found Chief Duro at the riverside, proudly overseeing the construction of a massive new fishing dock that reached arrogantly into the river's heart. "Chief," Teo called out, breathless from his run. Duro turned, his expression a mixture of impatience and condescension. "Teo, again, what folklore do you bring me today?" Undeterred, Teo recounted the encounter with the spirit, his voice low and earnest. "She spoke to me, Chief. She is deeply displeased. The trees, the overfishing this dock. We are breaking the sacred vow." For a fleeting second, a shadow of unease, a ghost of the humble man he once was, passed over Duro's face. But it was quickly swallowed by his bloated ego. He laughed, a loud, performative sound meant for the ears of his surrounding aides. "The river owes me everything, Teo. Its abundance is a tribute to my leadership. These stories are for frightening children, not for governing men." The villagers who had gathered to watch the construction began to murmur, some laughing along with their chief, their faith in his confidence overshadowing Teo's palpable fear. "Do not let the whispers of an old man cloud your judgment," Duro announced to the crowd, puffing out his chest. "The river is strong because my will is strong." As he slammed his fist into his palm for emphasis, the water lapping at the new dock posts suddenly erupted in a violent, churning frenzy, as if the river itself were angrily rejecting his words, causing several people at the front to stumble back in alarm. Emboldened by his perceived victory over superstition, Chief Duro announced his most ambitious project yet, a vast permanent marketplace built directly upon the sacred riverbank, a place to trade with neighboring villages and amass even greater wealth. "We will show everyone our prosperity," he proclaimed. The ensuing days were filled with the sounds of progress, the pounding of hammers, the rhythm of drums, the laughter of commerce, all of which drowned out the river's gentle, flowing song. Teo watched in silent horror as the protective reeds and the remaining ancient trees were ripped from the earth. The river began to visibly sicken. Its clear blue water turned a stagnant, muddy brown, and a faint, cloying smell of decay began to emanate from it, a stark contrast to its former fresh scent. During the market's boisterous opening celebration, a young child, chasing a runaway wooden toy, slipped on the newly exposed, slippery bank. The current, usually gentle, seemed to come alive, grasping the boy and pulling him under with unnatural force. A scream tore through the festive air. It was Teo, who had been watching with a heavy heart, who plunged in without a second thought and dragged the sputtering child to safety. As he handed the boy to his weeping mother, an old village matriarch, her eyes clouded with age and wisdom, grasped Teo's arm. "The spirit stirs again," she whispered, nodding toward the water, which now seemed to flow with a dark purpose. That night, under a half-obscured moon, several witnesses swore they saw the river glow with a faint, ominous, bloody hue. The first undeniable, public sign of the spirit's wrath came at dawn. Fishermen went out as usual, casting their nets with practiced hands, but when they pulled them in, the nets were heavy not with living, silver fish, but with a tragic harvest of their lifeless bodies. The river's surface was a glistening, sickening blanket of death. A foul, metallic odor, like old blood and rusted iron, hung thick in the air, suffocating the familiar scent of water and earth. The crops planted near the bank, once the most fertile in the village, began to wither, their leaves turning a brittle yellow despite the moist soil. A low current of panic began to electrify the village. Chief Duro tried to project an image of control. "It is a passing sickness, a twist of nature. The river is resilient and will recover," he declared, but his voice lacked its former booming conviction, betraying a thread of fear. That evening, with a heart as heavy as the dead fish, Teo went to the riverbank. He knelt, not to pray for a miracle, but for the strength to guide his chief toward redemption. As he closed his eyes, the water before him began to swirl, slowly and deliberately forming a face. It was the face of the old fisherman who had first given Duro the water, the humble disguise the spirit had worn. The face in the water looked directly at Teo, its expression one of profound, heartbreaking sadness, and then it slowly dissolved back into the current, a silent, unequivocal confirmation of Teo's gravest fears and the spirit's broken heart. That night, Chief Duro's sleep was not restful, but a prison of terrifying visions. He dreamt he was standing in his grand palace, but the marble floors were the slimy, muddy riverbed, and the walls were not wood and stone, but churning, dark, cold water. The dead fish floated in the air around him, their glassy eyes fixed on him in silent accusation. The water began to rise, inch by terrifying inch, flooding his chambers, swallowing his golden ornaments and fine silks. In the doorway, illuminated by a ghostly light, stood the figure of the old fisherman Teo, but his form was shimmering, elongated and radiating an ancient power. He said nothing, only pointed a long, bony finger directly at Duro's heart. Duro woke with a strangled gasp, sitting bolt upright in his bed, drenched in a cold sweat that had nothing to do with the night's warmth. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The echo of thunder rumbled, but when he looked out his window, the sky was clear and starry. Then he heard it, a whisper, slithering from the direction of the river, slamming into his soul. It was the same voice from his dream, the voice from the time of the drought. "Return what you took." He was utterly alone in the oppressive dark, the words branding themselves onto his spirit, a terrifying secret shared only between a fallen chief and the elemental power he had betrayed. Despite the chilling dream and the whispered warning, Duro's pride was a chain that held him fast. The annual Festival of Prosperity, a celebration commemorating the end of the drought, was imminent. To cancel, it would be a public admission of his failure, a validation of Teo's warnings and his own subconscious fears. He decided the festival would be his ultimate act of defiance, a spectacular display of his power over the river and the narrative. When Teo heard the plans were proceeding, he made one final, desperate pilgrimage to the palace. "Chief, you must listen," he implored, his voice cracking with emotion. "The dream, the dead fish, the whispers, they are not coincidences. They are warnings from a wounded spirit. We must cancel the festival and collectively beg for her forgiveness." Duro, surrounded by his sycophantic courtiers, felt a hot wave of anger and shame wash over him. "Enough, Teo!" he roared, his voice echoing across the courtyard, silencing the busy preparations. "Your fear-mongering ends now. I am the chief here, not a superstitious old woman. I will not be dictated to by the wind and the water." In a fit of rage, he shoved Teo backward, causing the old man to lose his balance and fall hard onto the dusty ground before the entire assembled village. A collective gasp of shock rippled through the crowd. As Duro turned his back on the fallen fisherman, a sudden, unnatural wind howled through the square, snuffing out every torch and lantern, plunging the scene into momentary darkness. When the light returned, an old woman who had been standing at the crowd's edge was gone, vanished into a wisp of river mist that dissolved on the air. On the morning of the festival, a profound and unsettling quiet lay over the village. The air was still and heavy, and the river was unnaturally placid, its surface a flat gray sheet of glass, reflecting the grim sky. Then, as the sun began to bleed light over the horizon, the impossible happened. The river's flow simply stopped. The water hesitated, trembled as if in confusion, and then, with a deep, groaning shudder, it began to flow backwards asterisk. A wave of pure, undiluted terror swept through the villagers who witnessed this defiance of nature. "The river runs backward," they screamed, their voices shrill with panic. "It is the ultimate omen. The spirit denies her own nature." The village elders, their faces pale with dread, huddled together. "This is the great river's wrath," one of them croaked, his voice trembling. "From the oldest tales, when the spirit is grievously and repeatedly offended, the water turns its back on the land." Chief Duro, hearing the commotion, stormed out of his palace. "Silence them," he barked at his drummers. "Begin the festival. We will drown out this madness with our joy and our drums." The lead drummer, his hands shaking, raised his mallet high. But before it could strike the drumskin, the large, taut drum itself split cleanly down the middle with a sharp, percussive crack, as if sliced by an invisible blade. That night, a new, more insidious kind of fear gripped the village. The river did not rage or flood in the traditional sense. Instead, under the cover of the moonless night, it silently, deliberately overflowed its banks. Dark, cold water, smelling strongly of damp rot, slithered like a serpent into huts, soaking sleeping mats, contaminating food stores, and leaving a film of slime on everything it touched. Yet by the first light of dawn, the water was always gone, receded back to its banks as if it had never been there, leaving behind only the damp evidence, the lingering stench of decay, and the chilling, undeniable proof of the spirit's intelligent, creeping power. The people were now thoroughly terrified, speaking in hushed tones of a wet ghost, a sentient curse that walked the village. Their fear and anger began to crystallize around Chief Duro. "The chief's pride angered the river," they muttered in the safety of their homes. "And now we all share his punishment." The village guard, making his rounds that second night, made a discovery that turned his blood to ice. A trail of wet, glowing footprints, shimmering with a faint phosphorescence, led from the riverbank, through the now quiet market, down the main path, and stopped directly before the ornate, carved door of Chief Duro's private sleeping chamber. The message was unambiguous and deeply personal. The spirit was not just in the village, she was at his very threshold. Exhausted, soul-weary, and fearing the worst, Teo returned to his small hut by the river. He collapsed onto his simple mat and fell into a deep, trance-like sleep. In this state, he was transported to a breathtaking realm of shimmering, aqueous light. Before him stood the river spirit in her true, majestic form, a towering being of pure, flowing water and brilliant light, her presence both awe-inspiring and humbling. Beside her stood the translucent, smiling image of the old fisherman, her chosen guise. One man's pride endangers all, the spirit said, her voice a powerful cascade of sound. His deafness threatens to drown every song, but one man's humility can be a dam against the flood. One listening heart can still turn the tide. She glided toward Teo, her light enveloping him. Into his open palm she placed a beautiful pearlescent conch shell, intricately carved with ancient symbols of flowing water and intertwined roots. It was cool and solid, humming with a palpable, ancient energy. When the river rises in its true, final anger, when the wave of retribution is poised to fall and all seems lost, she instructed, her voice echoing in his very bones, bring this to the heart of the storm. Put your faith to your lips and blow, and my voice will be heard above the fury. Teo awoke with a violent start, gasping for air as if emerging from deep water. His hand was clenched tightly into a fist. He slowly, reverently uncurled his fingers. Lying on his palm, real and solid, was the carved shell. The day of the festival arrived under a sky the color of bruised flesh, heavy and oppressive. The villagers, their festive spirit poisoned by fear, gathered as commanded. Chief Duro stood on a raised platform to give his opening speech, his face ashen. Before he could utter a single word, a deep, guttural groan erupted from the very bowels of the earth. The ground beneath the sprawling riverside market began to shudder violently, then liquefy into a thick, sucking quicksand. With a horrific, roaring sound, the entire marketplace, the stalls, the goods, the proud new dock, everything was swallowed whole by the hungry earth, which then gave way to the river. The water did not sweep the debris away, it devoured it, consuming the symbol of Duro's greed into its muddy depths. People screamed, scrambling over each other in a blind panic to escape the sinking ground. The chaos was absolute, a scene from a nightmare. Then, cutting through the cacophony of terror, came the spirit's voice, calm, clear, and immense, speaking not to their ears but to their souls. You built on borrowed ground, and now the lender claims her due. As the villagers watched, frozen in stunned horror, Chief Duro's own golden throne, the ultimate symbol of his pride and power, bobbed to the surface of the churning mud, spun in a slow, mocking circle, and then sank like a stone into the abyss, vanishing forever. The festival ground was now a nightmarish landscape of churned mud and wreckage. The villagers, in their shock, their grief, and their rising anger, collectively turned their backs on Chief Duro. They looked at him not as their leader, but as the architect of their ruin, and they fled to higher ground, leaving him standing alone in the rain that had begun to fall. Abandoned and utterly defeated, Duro did not retreat to his palace. Instead, he stumbled, half blind with shame, toward the small, forgotten shrine at the river's edge where he had first, with a pure heart, made his vow. He fell to his knees in the thick mud, his fine robes becoming a filthy shroud. The memories of his past humility, his genuine desperation, and the sincere promise he had spoken there came flooding back with the force of a physical blow. "What have I done?" he sobbed, the words torn from the depths of his soul. The figure of the old fisherman appeared beside him, not as a dream but as a solid, sorrowful presence, his eyes holding the deep grief of the river itself. "I gave you water," the spirit's voice spoke through the old man's form, layered with an immeasurable, divine sorrow. "I gave you life, and in return I asked only for your respect. You returned poison, you returned greed, you built a kingdom on a broken promise." The truth of her words was a final, shattering blow. Duro collapsed forward, his face in the mud, his body racked with sobs, completely and utterly broken. The scale of his betrayal was now as vast and deep as the river he had wronged. As if Duro's complete breaking were a signal she had been waiting for, the sky tore itself asunder. A true biblical tempest was unleashed. The wind howled like a banshee, and the rain fell not in drops but in solid, punishing sheets. The river responded in kind, swelling with terrifying speed, becoming a wall of furious foaming water that charged toward the village, no longer creeping but attacking. People screamed, scrambling onto rooftops, their prayers whipped away by the gale. Teo, clutching the carved shell as if it were his own heart, fought his way through the horizontal rain and howling wind, his old body battered by the storm. He was not seeking shelter. He was heading directly for the riverbank, for the fallen chief. He found Duro still prostrate before the shrine, seemingly ready to be washed away. "Chief!" Teo yelled, his voice a faint whisper against the storm, pulling the broken man to his feet. "We must face this together. Your people need you to be humble now, not strong." As they stood, united in their desperation, a colossal form rose from the very heart of the river. It was the river spirit in her full apocalyptic glory, a towering goddess of water and storm, lightning crackling within her translucent body, her hair a maelstrom of rain and cloud. She was the storm, and she was the judgment, and her terrifying gaze fell upon the two men, one humble, one humbled, standing together against the tide of her wrath. The spirit's voice was the storm itself, the crash of thunder, the howl of the wind, the relentless drumming of the rain. "You took my banks for your market," she boomed, and a vision of the falling trees flashed around them. "You took my trees for your palace," she accused, and the image of the grand building materialized in the air before dissolving. "You took my fish for your endless greed," she roared, and the dead, silvery bodies seemed to float in the rain-filled air. "You took my silence for your consent and my patience for your weakness." Duro wept openly, his tears lost in the downpour. "I was wrong, forgive me, I beg you." The spirit's fury was a tangible force. "What is forgiveness to a river? I am not a creature of petty emotions. I only understand balance, flow, and consequence." She then turned her gaze to Teo, and her tone softened, becoming like the flow of a deep, calm current. "But one man remembered the old songs. One man's heart beat in rhythm with my own." Her eyes, pools of ancient water, shifted back to Duro. "Your words are as empty as a dried-up stream. Show me. Restore what you destroyed. Balance the scales." The storm seemed to pause, the wind held its breath, and the rain hung in the air like a billion suspended diamonds, waiting for his answer. The fate of every soul in the village balanced on the edge of a promise that had to be remade not with words but with action. "I will," Duro whispered, the words barely audible. Then, finding a strength he did not know he possessed, he shouted it to the heavens, his voice raw and true. "I will restore it, I swear it." The moment the vow left his lips, the suspended rain fell, but now it was a gentle, nurturing shower. The storm's raging heart had passed, the time for judgment was over, and the time for atonement had begun. The next morning, Duro issued an order that stunned the village. His palace was to be dismantled, stone by stone, timber by timber. He himself worked alongside the lowest laborer, his hands bleeding, his back aching, his former pride replaced by a grim determination. The stones were used to build a strong, protective wall along the eroded riverbank. He distributed every last piece of his remaining gold and wealth to those who had lost everything in the market's destruction. Under Teo's gentle but firm guidance, they began the long, arduous process of replanting the ravaged shoreline, sowing seeds and saplings with prayers on their lips. Duro worked not as a chief, but as a penitent servant, his every action a silent apology. The river watched, its flow returning to its normal direction, but its waters remained dark and watchful, a silent, flowing jury testing the sincerity of this newfound, fragile humility. For 7 days and 7 nights, the village worked in a spirit of shared purpose and quiet cooperation, their community reforged in the fires of shared crisis. On the dawn of the 7th day, as the first rays of sun touched the water, a final miracle unfolded. The river, which had run brown and angry for so long, underwent a breathtaking transformation. It cleared from the bottom up, becoming a crystal-clear, vibrant blue, more pure and alive than anyone had ever seen, as if washed clean from the inside out. The foul odor vanished, replaced by the sweet, clean scent of water lilies and wet stone. As the sun rose, the river spirit appeared once more. But this time she was not a towering fury. She stood serenely on the water's surface. Radiant and peaceful, a gentle, forgiving smile gracing her features. She glided toward the bank where Teo and a weary, but hopeful Duro stood. She did not speak aloud, but simply bowed her head to Teo in a gesture of profound gratitude and respect. Then she glided to the newly planted saplings and touched them with a shimmering hand. Instantly, they grew into strong, mature, deeply rooted trees, their leaves a brilliant, healthy green. From the very heart of the river, A beam of pure, golden, peaceful light shot up into the sky, a brilliant column of restored balance and accepted promise. The spirit finally spoke, her voice now like the gentle, reassuring flow of a healthy stream. "A chief rules people," she declared, her words carrying to every ear. "But a guardian protects life. A chief builds a kingdom for a generation, but a guardian stewards a legacy for eternity. Let the humble guard what the proud forgot." She turned her luminous gaze to Duro. He understood immediately. Without a moment's hesitation, he knelt not before the spirit but before Teo, the humble fisherman he had once mocked and shoved aside. "I am not fit to lead," Duro said, his voice thick with a hard-won peace. "The true guardian, the one who never broke faith, has been here all along." Teo, with tears of compassion in his eyes, placed a hand on Duro's shoulder. "You led us back from the brink," he said kindly. "That is a leadership greater than any crown." Teo then turned to the spirit and the gathered villagers. "I will be the river's guardian," he announced, his voice clear and strong. A wave of relief, approval, and deep respect washed over the people. They knew in their hearts that this was the natural, the right order of things. The spirit nodded, her form beginning to shimmer and fade, blending back into the water from which she came. "The river is in wise hands," she whispered, her voice becoming one with the flowing current, leaving behind a profound and lasting sense of peace. The village was reborn, not in ostentatious wealth, but in a deep, abiding harmony with the land. The greenery was lusher, the laughter of children was sweeter and more carefree, and the river flowed with a cheerful, musical rhythm that seemed to approve of the new balance. A new market was built, but this time it was placed a respectful distance from the bank, connected by a beautiful, winding path lined with the spirit-blessed trees whose shade was a constant blessing. The people, guided by Teo's wisdom, learned to fish sustainably and to farm with a light touch, taking only what they needed and giving thanks for every harvest. Teo, now the official guardian, was their guide and spiritual leader, a living bridge between the human world and the natural one. He taught the children the names and uses of the river plants and the old songs of gratitude. One day, as he looked into the clear, placid water, he saw a single, magnificent fish, its scales shimmering with an ethereal, luminous light, like a swimming jewel. It hovered for a long moment, looking directly at him with an intelligent eye, and then darted gracefully into the deep, dark depths. It was a final, beautiful sign that the spirit was not just appeased, but pleased, her presence now a gentle, protective force in the river's healed heart. Duro, now an old man stripped of his title but rich in a humility he had once lost, knew his journey of atonement was complete. He had spent years working the land, serving the community, and living simply. He sought out Teo by the river one final, peaceful evening. "Thank you," Duro said, his voice raspy but serene. "You saved me from the prison of my own pride. You saved us all by holding fast to the truth." Teo smiled, the setting sun painting his kind face in gold. "You saved yourself, Duro, the moment you chose to listen again to the whisper over the shout." Duro looked out at the thriving village, the healthy river, and the happy, secure people. "Tell them my story," he said softly, his gaze distant. "Tell them that a promise forgotten is a life borrowed, and that a debt to a spirit always, always comes due. Let my failure be their warning, and my redemption be their hope." The next morning, the former chief Duro was gone. He had walked into the misty hills with nothing but a staff and a small satchel, leaving behind his fine clothes and his pride forever. All that remained were a set of footprints leading toward the rising sun, which were soon washed away by a gentle morning rain, as if the river itself was granting him a final, merciful cleansing and a peaceful end to his long journey. Many more years passed in tranquil prosperity. Teo, the guardian, now advanced in years but sharp in spirit, lived in his simple hut by the river, a living symbol of the village's unbreakable covenant with the water. His daily ritual of gratitude never wavered, a constant reminder of the balance they cherished. Villagers would come to him not just for blessings, but for counsel, seeking his wisdom on matters of the heart and the land. He was a gentle leader who taught that true strength lay in respect, not domination. The river remained a peaceful, abundant benefactor, its health a direct reflection of the people's care. Sometimes, on nights when the moon was full and the air was still, the villagers would swear they could see the spirit's shimmering reflection standing beside Teo on the bank, a silent, approving partner in their stewardship. One day, a small child, born long after the great storm and knowing only peace, tugged on Teo's worn tunic. "Guardian," she asked, her eyes wide with innocent curiosity, "will the river ever get angry and roar like in the old stories?" Teo knelt down, his old bones creaking, so his eyes were level with hers. He led her to the water's edge where the clear current gently lapped at the stones. "The river is not good or bad, little one," he explained, his voice as soft as the breeze. "It simply is asterisk. It gives life, and it must receive respect in return. It does not roar out of malice, but as a reminder when it is forgotten." He opened a small, worn pouch tied to his belt and took out the carved shell, which still hummed with a soft, inner light, a tangible piece of magic from a time of great trial. "The river will only roar again if men's hearts become stone, deaf to its whispers and blind to its beauty." He brought the shell to his lips. He did not blow a blast for war or warning, for there was no storm. Instead, he blew a single, pure, clear note that hung in the air, a sound of perfect harmony and connection. In response, the entire surface of the river glittered, as if 1,000 diamonds had risen to the surface to dance in the sunlight. The water itself seemed to shimmer with joy. The child laughed in pure delight, understanding not with complex thoughts but with her soul that she was part of this beautiful, sacred balance. The river was alive, it was loved, and it was listening. Narrator's voice, warm and resonant over cinematic shots of the peaceful village, the flowing river, children playing safely, and Teo watching over it all with a serene smile. In every drop of water lives a promise. In every flowing stream, an ancient covenant between humanity and the earth. Pride builds walls that block the flow, but humility opens the channels for life to flourish. The chief broke his word, and in the ensuing drought of his own making, he found a truth more precious than any crown. That true strength lies not in domination, but in stewardship, and that mercy is the universe's greatest gift, always offered to those who possess the courage to be humble once more. What do you think the river would whisper to our world today? Have you ever made a promise to yourself, to others, or to the planet that you struggled to keep? What helps you find your way back to your word? Share your story in the comments below. Remember, the currents of kindness and respect you send out into the world always find their way back to you. If this story reminded you of the power of a kept promise, share it with someone who needs to hear it today.